Welcome back to the Built to Last podcast. I'd like to welcome today's guest, Matt Wenning. If you've been around strength training for any amount of time, you obviously know the name. Matt has trained at Westside Barbell during one of the most wild, crazy eras in powerlifting, put up some elite numbers over the years, has shifted more into biomechanics, coaching, injury prevention, and long-term performance. He's worked with fire departments, military units, and high-level athletes and sports teams. He's also built systems like the Matt Wenning Warmup system, which is focused on keeping people strong without wearing them out. So today we're going to try to dig into questions about longevity, programming, joint health, arthritis, as well as some of the goofy stuff we've been seeing on social media, some of the trends. So, all right, Matt, appreciate you being here.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. So, first of all, everybody obviously, at least myself, I always want to know what was it like in the early days, kind of training at Westside in that crazy environment?
Well, it was a different time. I mean, I had first gotten introduced to Westside Barbell like many others at that time from Powerlifting USA and Louis Simmons writing articles. And, I was reading on shit like getting faster to get stronger, which I didn't understand. Bands hadn't been around yet, but they were talking about chains, and I thought it was super interesting how the weights were come off the ground. They would get heavier and get lighter at the bottom, almost a contrasting method to work on strength curves. And we didn't really study a ton of that. And so I go to the Arnold Classic, which is going to happen here in like a week where I'm from and where I live now. And it's a 3-hour drive over to Columbus, Ohio from Indiana. And I see Louis Simmons and Dave Tate and George Halbert and all the old school OGs walking out of the Arnold Classic. And George had just won the bench bash, benching like 766 at 220. And these guys were just fucking monsters. And my buddy Brad is nudging me. Hey, you need to go over and talk to Louis. You're not going to get any better staying in Indiana. You've kind of maxed out everybody's knowledge and you want to get better. So you need to go talk to Louis. And so I get the balls up at like 18 to go to see Louis and talk to him. Hey, Louis. And he turns around. Everybody else turns around. I'm looking at a bunch of fucking meatheads. And these are the biggest guys that, at the entire Arnold Classic, including pro bodybuilders. I mean, these guys lifted real weights. And he's like, "Hey, what's your name and how much do you lift?" And I told him, and he's like, "Yeah, come on by sometime." So I get the testicles up in about 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks to drive over. And it's just this little hole in the wall strip mall gym that's like 800 square feet. It's the one that made it everything famous at Demarest. And I walk in and it's just scattered everywhere. There's chalk everywhere. There's blood underneath the monolift. Everything, nothing's been cleaned for 5 years. It's just all blood, sweat, and tears in there. And, I'm watching the guys work out and I'm working out with them and I'm strong enough to hang, but obviously I'm not the strongest guy in the group. So I just kind of keep my mouth shut and just train my ass off and just give all the effort I have. And it feels like I'm at a fucking lifting contest because of how high the anxiety and the adrenaline's running. Because one, you want to impress these guys, not realizing that, most people don't come into Westside Barbell and become impressive right off the rip. I mean, it takes time, but you want to go in and at least be able to hang. And that's kind of the badge of honor. And that's how I grew up. And so that first part at Westside Barbell was kind of earning your keep, earning your right to have an opinion, earning your right to step into that gym and be able to hang with guys. If you want to talk strength and you want to be I don't know, a face for strength training, then in my personal opinion, you need to fucking earn that shit. Right. And that's the problem that we have in strength conditioning right now is that social media has allowed everybody to have an opinion and a voice without actually having any real fucking blood, sweat, and tears under the bar. And I'm sure we'll get into it later, but the arguments that I've had in the last month or two with different people, I click on their fucking pages and they can't even squat my bench press. And Louis would have never put up with that shit. And I don't put up with it either. But the point is like, it's just, I don't know when powerlifting and strength training got a hold of such weak physical and mental people in the area where they can't handle, they can't handle rough coaching. They can't handle being told they fucking suck. They can't handle being called different names. Like, dude, that was a normal fucking Saturday for me, And so the intensity at Westside Barbell kind of fueled that process. And so we're bench pressing. I come down on a bench press day because he just tells me what day to come down. He doesn't tell me what we're doing. So I'm driving for 3 hours, like, what in the fuck am I getting myself into? We pull in and I hit a pretty good bench. I can hang with the guys. Well, we get to the accessories and we're doing these dumbbell rollbacks like you see Kenny Patterson do. And the first sets, everybody's using 70s. And no, so I'm 19. The next set is 80s. The next set is 90s. And then the last set, till complete balls to the wall, was 100-pound dumbbells. And Louie's like, hop in there and do that. Think about this. At 19 years old, you're doing 100-pound dumbbells, which most kids would love to be able to even bench press, and you're doing tricep rollbacks with it. Well, there was this other guy in the gym, and he only ended up getting 7 or 8. I come up behind him, and I get 14. The point of this story is 2 weeks later, when I came back again, they had kicked that guy out of the gym because I had beat him on tricep extensions. He's like, we don't let outsiders come in and beat the team members, and he fucking knew that if he got beat by you, that he was going to get kicked out. That's the kind of environment that I grew up in training.
Nice, man. Yeah, definitely a big contrast with today. And for me, I'm kind of new to the powerlifting stuff, but I mean, I just remember like, 15, 20 years ago, you'd go in the gym, they'd be playing like, White Zombie or Van
Yep.
Halen or at least like DMX or something. It's like
Yeah.
now it's like friggin' Katy Perry and
Oh
shit,
yeah. I mean, our normal playlist there was old school AC/DC, Pantera. Chuck always liked rap, so it was DMX, Tupac, shit like that. You got to remember, like in that time, most people that were in powerlifting was considered almost like a biker gang, like Hell's Angels. Like everybody was hardcore. Everybody didn't give a shit about 10 years from now. It was all about how badass you could be right now, how strong you could be. And some of us lasted through that and some of us didn't. But the point was is that when we went into train, it was like going into battle every time you went into train. So you got to think about that. You're doing that 4 times a week for years on end. It just battle tests you. And I remember Louis telling me for competing, he's like, we want to make training so mentally difficult that going to contests is easy. And it was right. I mean, the thing of it was is like when myself, Greg Penora, Chuck Vogelpool, Phil Harrington, trying to think of all the big squatters, Vlad, which in my opinion still has the world record squat at 1250. He did that in 2009 and was dunked into the fucking tank. It's the only squat I've seen over 1,250 pounds done that was actually legitly done by the rule book. Um, but and again, people will talk shit about that. But I mean, you as well as I've seen in the last year or two how bad multiply's gotten with the judging. That shit didn't pass back then. Chuck would go up to the judges if something got passed and say, take the lift away. He didn't get it. I watched him do it 3 or 4 times because he didn't feel like it represented what we did as a group. And we hardly ever cut squats high at meets. At least in Chuck's group, we didn't. And so yeah, that was an interesting time. It was fun. It was intense. But when we would train together, we would have 6 to 8 world record holders in the same group training together and all pushing each other as hard as we could. And so we went to meets, we would dominate everyone. My first meet that I represented Westside Barbell as a full-time member, I was ranked 8th in the world of all time. And within 8 months, I was number 3 of all time. And then within the next year and a half, I was the world record holder. And so there was something about that push group that when I would go to meets, I was comfortable because I felt like I was at a meet 4 times a week. So now there was some science and some thought process behind it as far as deloading and as far as control of understanding how to get to those big numbers without expending so much neurological energy. You learn how to just focus. Like the intensity, regardless if it was heavy as fuck or fast as fuck or fatiguing as fuck, you just learn to deal with it. And that made us all very battle hardened and very hard to beat in contests.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah, it's like you said, that just really molds you. And that kind of brings me to my next question, which is coming up in that environment. I'm sure you saw a lot of people that were able to kind of hang, and a lot of people that would, fall apart or couldn't hack it, or God forbid, get injured or whatever. How did that kind of environment shape how you think about longevity these days and sustainability?
Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing and I've thought about doing a YouTube video on it, but I learned as much of just what not to do as what to do at Westside Barbell and through those training sessions. I was the one that was very reserved. I always would stop a little bit before I felt beat up. But every time I went to a meet, now the first time that happened, I remember Louie and Chuck kind of riding my ass, going, "Dude, you had another set. You could do another set." And I told him, I was like, I saved that last maximal effort for the contest. Because I remember Larry Pacifico talking about that all the time. And for those people that don't know Larry Pacifico, he won 9 IPF world titles back to back, unbeaten. So almost 10 years straight, he was the best in the world in his weight class. I mean, I don't know any other lifter that's done that, maybe, but Ed Cohen. And so Pacifico was before Ed Cohen, maybe a decade before Ed Cohen. But the point was is that Pacifico told me a long time ago when I was very young that only use 100% maximal effort when you go to contests. Do not use that level of anxiety and stimulus in the gym training. And Louis was not about that. Louis wanted to go as hard as he could go at all times. And I didn't do that as much. Well, the first meet that I went to, um, I went from 1,003 squat to 1055, and I only pushed to a 9 RPE in the gym. But the thing of it was, I never got beat up, and I always felt fresh at meets. And so after the first meet of making a 50-pound PR on my squats, Louie and Chuck just backed off and let me do what I wanted to do in training. And I remember Chuck going, "Hey, look, I don't have training partners that bow down when shit gets hard. But if you, as long as you keep getting better at every meet, I'm not going to say anything." And so I was probably the first lifter that Chuck was around that let not go 100 miles an hour on max effort day, because when I went to the meets, I would bring it. And I learned that very young. So I watched a lot of guys around me fall apart. I watched Louis constantly get injured or be injured before I even got there from just going balls to the wall too much. And so I realized that balls to the wall only mattered when it was a world record and it counted at a meet. And so that's where my ideas of max effort training, which is what the conjugate method is famous for, really meant 90% or 92%. It didn't mean 100%. So if you look at any of my lifts, world records or training lifts, none of them ever really look crazy hard. But I know when I can stop and heal from what I'm doing versus push past that and not heal. So, for instance, if I go to a heavy deadlift and I pull as heavy as I can go that day, I know that it's a 14-day recovery point to that. If I stop one set early, it's 3 to 4 days recovery. So, which one gets more volume in a month?
Right. Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Yeah. And I know with people having arthritis, or, in my case, ankylosing spondylitis, that kind of shit.
Yep.
I almost feel like my limits around RPE 7 or 8, and then beyond that, it's just like, all right, well, my back's going to be fucked up if I go any
Yeah.
harder. So, and then also, speaking of, injury prevention, so you've sort of famously been working with fire departments, military sports teams. I guess what I'm really wondering is, especially with fire departments, because that's obviously a high risk, high intensity job. What kind of injuries were you seeing? What kind of injury patterns before you started working with them?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. And really, what it did is it transferred directly over to me working with special operations in Big Army. So, in the special operations in Big Army, we saw knees, lower backs, and shoulders be the top three primary areas of injury and problems, skeletal, muscular wise. It was no different in the tactical population of the fire departments, because for them, they may not have been in the same shape as the tactical guys in the military, but they would sit around all day, then hop up and have to go lift a 400-pound patient and take him to the hospital, right? So we don't see as many fires anymore because of the sprinkler systems and the alarm systems. But what we do see is that the average population weight has skyrocketed. So when they show up to a scene, they might be anywhere from 60 to 100 pounds of gear on, and they're going to have to carry a 600 pounder, put them into the ambulance, and then take them to the hospital and load them and unload them. That's sketchy shit if they're not strong. And so it was the same injuries, but the difference was the application of the programming with special operations and infantry units and airborne divisions. Those guys usually were only in for 4 to 7 or 8 years, right? So they were in their prime years. And so, yeah, we saw injuries because their impacts were really high, jumping out of planes, jumping off of, mechanical vehicles, doing ruck marches for 15 miles with full packs because how the Army trains is stupid. The fire service was different because those guys are active for 25 plus years. So a guy gets on at the fire department at 23, 25, he's got to work until he's 55, 60. And so the time parameter changes how and when and why you get someone stronger and how you do it. So I actually learned more from the fire service because the guys had to be in shape and be fit and be injury free 5 times longer than the military guys. But it also gave me longer time to develop them slower, more methodically. Whereas, when you get contracts with special operations or military personnel, you only have a year to get them better, and you've already burnt 15, 20% of their career in the military gone, right? So it has to be quick, it has to be effective. Whereas in the fire department, you can slow everything down and you can build up the passive tissue much slower. So I found that I learned more from fire department guys in some ways than special operations and things of that nature because those guys were already so mentally tough that I didn't have to work on their mental toughness. But when I went into the fire service, you would think those guys would be tough, but a lot of them are not. They see a job with very good pay. They only work every 3 days. They get great insurance, great benefits. And they tend, once they pass and get into the fire service, they tend to get lazy. And so keeping them in shape is more difficult emotionally and psychologically than the fire service guys because, or I'm sorry, the special operations guys, because those guys are animals, right? They're just wired different. So your physical preparation and how you get there is just a little bit different because of your timeline.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah, and I think it was you. I was seeing another video where you're talking about where doing their weight training and stuff, you'll have like lower rest intervals because it's like when they're moving, it's like
Yeah.
jump up, activate the sympathetic nervous system, and then just go, 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 right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's a big deal because those guys go from 0 to 100 miles an hour really quick. In the military, when you get a deployment, they might have to go overseas. They kind of know that they're in a battle zone and that shit's going to happen. But those guys, they basically sprint, rest, repeat, sprint, rest, repeat. In the fire service, those guys might put on gear if there is a real fire, and they might have to work that fire for 3 to 5 hours straight. That's if there's no people in the building that they have to go and rescue. So there's a big difference in GPP, and that's where I started implementing the Wenning Warmups, keeping the heart rate high, keeping the movements quick, keeping the rest periods low. Started seeing a great transfer in conditioning without actually having to do extra conditioning days. But the big point of that is that the Wenning Warmups are designed to develop the structural weak points. So if we know that hamstrings play a crucial role in knee injuries, we use a lot of hamstring curls to protect that area. If we know glute activation is limited or lacking, and that's a big problem with lower back injuries, we do a lot of reverse hypers and a lot of GHRs and a lot of stiff-legged deadlifts to get all that stuff prepared and ready. So again, it's not how strong you are after you're warmed up, it's how strong are you cold. And that's where you create what I call strength reserve, which is, let's say we get everybody to bench 400, right? Well, how much can somebody bench with no warm-ups if they just lay down and if they say they can bench 405 with a proper warm-up and everything's perfect in the rest periods? Well, how much can somebody come in and just do cold if they can bench 405? 250? Just take out 250 and do it, and it's probably not going to be too dangerous,
Right.
right? That'd be my guess. Well, that's a normal weight that those guys would have to mess with. Same thing with the deadlift. If we get their deadlift up around 500 as an average, which my best department that I had for 18 years, we got the average up to a 480-pound deadlift over 120 guys. That was the average.
Wow, that's
So,
fucking crazy.
yeah, it was pretty good. So the trick with it though was how much can they deadlift cold and not get hurt? And what we figured was is the maximal strength rose, then their minimal amount that they could do and not get hurt went up as well. So I was trying to get them to where they could pick up 250 cold and it wouldn't be a problem. And my opinion is that's 50% of 1RM, right? If you're lifting 50% of your best, you're probably not going to get hurt doing that. But if you're some jackass walking around and 250 is your max, which is above the normal max for a grown man deadlift, I know it sounds crazy, but that's true. And you go and pick that up on the job, your chances of getting hurt are 10 times higher than somebody that has double the strength. So that's why we build the one rep max strength up so high. And everybody's, well, I don't want to be a power lifter. I mean, I've fought this for 20 years. Well, I'm not a power lifter. I don't know why I need to have my deadlift up that high. It's because it needs to be strong cold. And to do it safely, we need to have 50% is your best cold. So if 100% is 500, then 250 is safe for you. The average person, what's the average male weigh now? 220? See what I'm saying? So the math starts to make sense. So now if you got two or three guys lifting up a 500-pound person and everybody can deadlift 250 cold, then their reserve is 750 pounds. Make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, that makes sense, and I never really thought about, yeah, because I mean, you literally have to deadlift people, to take them out of a fire or whatever. So,
Yeah. But think about
yeah,
it. You pull up on the fire scene, you don't get to deadlift 100, then 150, then 200, then 275, and now you're ready.
right. Yeah, let
You
me
just
warm
have to
up
fucking
first.
hop off the truck and do it. And so my guesstimation, my personal professional observation is that safe is 50%.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Yeah, and my next question too was kind of tied into that. Um, it was basically about, so the Wenning warm-ups, for those that don't know, is kind of like, a series of, I guess, special exercises or small exercises you do to kind of prime the muscles before your primary lift, right?
Yep. So you have three different exercises that you do. You have a primer. The primer is a mirrored exercise, very similar to what you're going to do. So if you're squatting, then you're going to do a squat style exercise. I like to use traction based movements like the winning belt squat, or we'll use for the bench press, we'll use hanging kettlebells. It's high stability. All of these different factors. Then you have two structured weakness muscle groups. For the upper body, for example, most people don't have strong enough lats to protect their shoulders or they can't control their scapula. That's a big problem with shoulder health. So we warm up a lat like a row or a pull down. And then what we want to do is we want to turn the bench press into a non-shoulder, non-pec movement and more tricep dominant because the triceps will take far more volume and ass whoopings than the pec and the shoulder will. So what we do is we get them arm dominant and we do a lot of tricep work. We do that pre-benching for post-activation potentiation. The only problem with it is that you have to be in shape enough for it to not affect your main lift. And so what I see a lot of people do is they go too heavy. Let's say if you're a 250-pound bencher, you should be using like 20-pound dumbbells. It's not meant to beat you into the ground. So you got to remember this. When I bench press 606 at my first meet that I broke the world record in the squat, I benched 606 afterwards. I only used 35-pound dumbbells for a warm up for a 606 bench. So people message me all the time. Oh man, I do your warm ups, but it's affecting my main lift. And then I'm like, well, how much are you using? They're like, well, I use 50-pound dumbbells. I'm like, how much do you bench? 285. Well, yeah, you dumbass. You see what I mean? It's about getting everything primed. So it's one primer, which is the mirror movement, and then it's two um, known weaknesses, usually triceps and lats if we're talking upper body.
And I find for me that it's really great to do that. That, I mean, the more warm ups, the better. Dealing with arthritis, because I mean, your inflammation pain ramps up, and you really gotta almost, almost kind of like shock the inflammation out of there. So,
Well, yeah, I mean, and there's some science behind that. The higher temperature and blood flow the muscle has, the more pliable it is. Therefore, everything's going to break loose. There's a ton of studies on that stuff. One of the guys, I'd have to go look at my books to find out which one, but there's books written on that all over the place in the early mid 80s about it doesn't say winning warm-ups, obviously, because I was a kid, but it talks about potentiation warm-ups and tissue tolerance preparation. And it talks about high volume, low intensity, and it talks about for every 1 degree Fahrenheit, or maybe it's 1 degree Celsius, I can't remember, that not only does your performance increase, but your pain threshold reduces by massive amounts. And so when I started reading that, probably close to 20 years ago now, I started noticing that one, at Louie's place, we were never doing any front loading. So we would never do like hamstring curls and belt squats before we would hit the main squat. We just warmed up for the main squat and then we did all that shit as accessories. But I found when I went over to Australia to be the keynote speaker at an ASCA conference, one of the ladies that was getting her PhD with one of the rugby teams was talking about this post activation potentiation she was doing with the rugby players and how it was increasing 1RM strength. And I'm like, son of a bitch, I don't do anything before I lift. Maybe that would be something new and effective. And so I go home and I'm friends with Flex Wheeler, one of the top bodybuilders to ever live. And he's starting to tell me, he goes, man, I never got more um, more benefit than doing things around 20 and 25 reps. So now I have the rep range. So now I start looking at, I'm reading a book that Vasily Alexiev was in, which was the all-time world record holder. He broke 70 world records in Olympic weightlifting. And he used to do 300 kettlebell snatches and cleans before he would touch a barbell.
wow,
So
that's
just
like
figure eights,
cardio.
clean snatches, basically doing GPP before he would touch the barbell just to get loose and get ready. And I'm thinking, motherfucker, I don't do any of that. So I got 300 reps. Now I got how many reps per set. So that took 4 sets. So if you look at 4 sets of 25 is 100, 3 exercises is 300.
Yeah.
See how that works? And so now I'm following Alexiev's ideals. I'm following Flex Wheeler's ideals. And now I'm following this PhD's ideals on potentiation post activation. So I start plugging it in and I just use it for the bench only. And I'd be goddamned if I didn't bench 600 at that next meet. So then I applied it with the squat, the bench, and the deadlift, and I broke the world record total raw at 37 years old. So it was like, fuck, that whole time my work capacity was what was holding me back.
Yeah, you can't argue with the results, man. I mean, if
Well, yeah, you can. Just go on the internet.
oh
You can
yeah.
argue anything you want.
That kind of brings me to like unfortunately we're kind of running out of time, but we have to get into this, man, because I know you've done some videos on a lot of this like weird new trends of like training, doing like flexion rows and
Yeah.
Jefferson curls and all that. I'd love to get your raw take on that.
Well, in my personal professional opinion and how long I have trained, I don't see anybody that rounds their back for training purposes that ever has done one, any massive weights for long periods of time. And two, a lot of the research that has been utilized to defend that Jefferson curl and those spinal flexion movements are not done under very extreme loads. So one of the papers that one of the guys was trying to bust my balls with, the study was using 5 kilograms of weight.
Oh my God.
Now here's where it gets crazy. If you go to Zatsiorsky's book and all three iterations, so the 94 version, the greenback, Science and Practice of Strength Training, the 2006 with Kramer, and the 2020 with Kramer and Fry, if you go to, I can't remember the exact page, 50 kilograms on a deadlift. So what's that, 110 pounds?
Yeah, that's a
So
lot.
110 pounds in your hands with good form is 200 kilograms of pressure on your lumbar disc. I mean, pretty nasty, right? So
Oh
it's
yeah.
already pretty crazy pressure. With improper form, i.e., rounded back or spinal flexion, it's 600 kilograms on your discs.
Yep.
Who in the fuck thought that that was a good idea to train that? In my opinion, the spine is one of those very rare areas in the body that does not adapt to training like everything else, right? The knees, the shoulders, the back, the hips, when done properly under long periods of time, they will adapt. But when you look at Stuart McGill's work, which I consider the smartest guy in the world with back work, he says that, the problem with your back is you look at the muscle called the multifidus, and it's one of the only muscles that crosses multiple joints. It goes through every vertebrae. And when you go into spinal flexion, it shuts completely off on EMG studies, which means you're going into passive tissue strength instead of muscle strength. I think we all know what that means. That means you're a sitting time bomb. And so if you look at all the top world records of all time in Olympic lifting, powerlifting, who do you see that rounds their back to do anything if they don't have to? Now you can't use Atlas stones and you can't use some strongman shit. Those guys just have to do what they got to do. But you look at like Colton Edelbright, for example, right? The greatest powerlifter the world's ever seen in the last 20 years, and that dude's deadlifting like 1,050 for reps. His spine doesn't move. And that's the biggest problem is I think in a perfect world, could we use spinal flexion? Maybe. But you have to get so good at learning how to control your spine first that nobody wants to use that part. They skip it. They just go to whatever's comfortable when the shit falls apart. My point is, if you, as a practitioner, if you give somebody an inch, they take a mile. So when you say, hey, you can use a Jefferson curl with 95 pounds, well, then some dickhead that doesn't get injured is going to use 405 with that. And then most of the people, if you can go click and look for yourself, that argue with me on technique, you go click on their max effort work and that their technique falls apart. So what they're looking for is they're looking for an excuse to why they suck.
Yeah, exactly,
They
man.
want a
Yeah.
research paper that tells them it's okay to look like shit, and we know that that's not true.
Yeah, I see a lot of that trend. Like, I saw some bullshit the other day where this guy's like, well, because you get people in the squat that get that valgus shift or whatever, that
Yeah,
knee cave. Like, knee cave is okay. And it shows somebody like competing with like their knees coming together, like they're
yeah.
trying not to piss their pants. I'm like, dude.
Well, and that's a whole nother thing. So if you go on my school channel, Winning Strength Academy, I posted a huge, I went into that very in depth and found all the research on knee valgus, and it really shuts you down and makes you less powerful. So these people that are doing this stuff with horrible knee positioning, if they learn how to push out and use their glutes, they'd be 20% stronger. They're just too impatient to fix their form. But one of my old coaches told me this 30 years ago when I first started lifting hard, 35 years ago. He said, looks right, flies right. You know what I mean? So if
Yeah,
something looks perfect, the chances of that person being injured are probably low. The chances of them getting better over the long term is probably high. Somebody that looks like complete garbage when they're deadlifting and squatting, they're not going to be around that long. And I don't give a shit what paper says this or paper says that. You don't see champions breaking technique. I mean, when's the last time you saw Vasily Alexiev or any of these top level Olympic lifters? They all look perfect when they do maximal world record loads.
right. Yeah, like Thor Bjornsson. Yeah, they're
Yeah, but I mean, even a
absolutely.
strongman, if you look at like Olympic lifting, something
Oh
that I
yeah,
think is
yeah.
high developmental. You look at that Sasha guy, that or what's his name? I'm trying to remember. I think it's Sasha, the dude that's got the world record clean and jerk right now, the super heavyweight. He looks perfect at everything he does, and he's 6'5" in Olympic lifting. He doesn't have the capacity for that.
Wow.
But why does he do everything perfect? So I don't get why everybody wants an out to have shit form.
Like you said, man. It's social media. Everybody, it's almost comparable to like everybody. We have these phones. It's like, all right, well, I have a TV station. I have a channel to broadcast it to. So I'm just gonna have my platform and
Hmm.
you know
Well, and I
dump
don't
my
get
ego out
frustrated
there.
with people that are not educated in the area. Where I get frustrated is that people are trying to stand out and look different, and they actually have an education and they actually have high level stuff. I'm starting to really realize that people that put physiotherapists behind their name overseas don't listen to a fucking thing they're telling you,
Yeah.
because I don't know where the hell they go to schooling for that shit. But man, I'll tell you what, I remember Andrew Locke, my friend that died last year. He told me that the fight on that was real because he was a physiotherapist, and he's like, you have no idea how ass backwards they are right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
And again, like I said, if you want to talk spinal health and you have a, let's go back to the spine. If you want to talk spinal health and you have an idea or a belief that you think something works, go do it under maximal loads for 20 years and come back and tell me how you do.
Right.
I mean, because that's what
Absolutely.
I'm telling you. I'm telling you to do it my way because I've deadlifted 700 pounds for 25 years with no back problems.
Exactly,
But
man.
nobody
That
wants to
says a
hold that
lot.
into any regard on the internet. I don't get it.
It's keyboard warriors, you know. And
Yeah,
Matt, I hate to cut you off. We are running out of time.
sure.
I'd love to chat with you all day. I know you got shit to do. So if you could tell everybody, we know you got the website wenningstrength.com. What else do you have out there if people want to kind of learn from you, train with you, that kind of stuff?
Yep. So we got Winning Strength Academy on School, SKOL. That's Hormozy stuff. I'm on Winning Strong on Instagram. Winning Strength is my business page on Instagram. My Facebook page, Matt Winning, and Winning Strength as well. Those are my big ones right now. And then we do a lot of different apps at an affordable price on Train Heroic. So we have Conjugate Elite, we have Tactical, we have Foundations, which is the start of Conjugate. So there's some things I take out and some things I put in for beginners. We have Recomp, which is people that come to me for weight loss. The nice thing about all those workouts is they're battle tested with actual clients before they become products. So, like if somebody were to come onto a Conjugate Elite, for an example, we run through that workout the week before we make it a product. So I can make small adjustments like, oh, client A or B did not adjust to this correctly. I'm going to drop this set down or I'm going to increase